Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. We've got a bit of a train wreck of a problem with Filthy Heretic. He's got this video called The Monopoly Problem. He doesn't know what a monopoly is. He doesn't know where it comes from. He doesn't know the history of it. He doesn't know the history of monopolies as such. But he thinks he's figured it out or something. So let's help him here.
Common refrain to free markets goes something like this. In a free market, nothing would stop monopolies from forming. These businesses will take advantage of their position and hurt people while...
Yeah, now the idea of monopolies occurring in a free market comes from the 1800s. The word monopoly means single power, and up until the late 1800s, the word monopoly was only associated with government. Nobody associated it with the private economy because the monopoly of government force was the only thing that really applied. The word, and it still is the only thing that applies. No economic entity has ever achieved monopoly power unless the government gave it the power. Okay? So, government power is the only place monopolies come from. Government is monopoly. Monopolies are government. There's no separating the two. Okay? So, the idea that the economy gets hampered or damaged by monopolies is a strange idea. The economy actually gets hampered or damaged by government controls, not by monopolies. Monopolies can only occur as a result of government action. Monopolies don't occur in free economies. Okay.
driving prices up. The first thing we need to do is define our terms. A monopoly, in this case, refers to an organization with exclusive control over a market.
You haven't defined your terms. What do you mean by control? Does that mean that they have the power to use guns inside there? Or not? Is there somebody stopping them from using the power of guns? How did they get control? What does your word control mean? If Apple has the exclusive control over the iPhone market, does that qualify? What do you mean by control? They don't have control over the phone market as such, but nobody else gets to make iPhones. Is that fair? What do you mean by control? Would you take off their control of the iPhone monopoly? What does control mean? So you haven't defined your terms. That's garbage.
Term originated in the 16th century, when royalty would accept bribes to grant businesses the sole exclusive right to do business in a geographic location. Thus,
coming from the authority of the government. Monopoly. Power. Monopower. Singular power.
Monopolies could only form with government permission.
Still the case, always the case, by definition that is the case. Monopolies can only form by government power, permission, whatever you want to call it.
So what's to stop a monopoly from forming in the free market? Well, without government permission, the only way a monopoly could possibly form in a free market is if customers want them to.
Now, if you admit that a free market does not have monopolies, and you think monopolies are bad, which clearly you do because you don't want the government to have monopoly on power, just realize that the free market is a result of the government having a monopoly on power. Okay? Just realize that your little fantasy world here of these efficient corporations that are just trying to help the customer, it's good customer service. They realize in their rational self-interest that it's better to help the customer in the long run. Under what system do they realize that? Why don't they just rob their customers and grab everything they can because they might be robbed tomorrow and they need to get as much wealth as possible? Why? Because nobody can rob them because there are police everywhere. We've stopped the use of physical force in society. Anytime the police go on strike, there are riots in the streets and havoc. We've stopped the use of physical force. That's why we have a free market. That's why nobody can get a monopoly together, because as soon as they get a big company, somebody else is going to start manufacturing that thing because they see how much money there is to be made. Even with automobiles, we finally see it. Of course, the big three couldn't stop little companies outside America. no company could get started inside America, just too expensive, until they did. The guy who had PayPal, who started PayPal, had enough money that he could start manufacturing automobiles inside the United States of America. Very high capital cost startup, but somebody did it. And now Tesla has a higher market value than the other big three, or maybe all three of the big three combined or something like that. It's insane. And it still doesn't make a profit, but that's just what the market values it at. All right, we're a little off the subject. So, if the price of something goes high enough and the value of it's high enough, somebody's going to get into manufacturing it. You can't stop them. Only the government can stop them. Now, that la-di-da land, you just take it for granted. The filthy heretic and all these ANCAP anarchists, they just take that for granted. They just think that's just the way the world works, is capitalism, big companies trying to get your business, corporations treating you politely, Starbucks having respect for you, McDonald's trying to make sure you like your food, replacing it if you don't like it. They take all that for granted. They think that'll be there whether the United States government exists or not. They think that's just the way the world is. That's how la-di-da they are. Well, go to Syria and see how their stock market's doing. And see if you can get a cheeseburger at McDonald's on every other corner. Go to Syria and see just how the world works. That's for real, son. Go to Russia and see how Russia's stock market's doing. And see if you can reliably get good food up and down any given street in Russia, in any city. So if you do away with the United States government and the amazing protections built in it by the Constitution, you're not going to have a la-la land of corporations and efficiency and business, big business. You're not going to have it. It's going to collapse, and you're only going to have governments and what governments do. And you'll have relative poverty. Look at Russia. Does Russia have big business? No, they have relative poverty. Their economy is about the size of Denmark's.
A company could provide goods better and cheaper than their competition, such that they're rewarded with a large market share. But gaining 100% dominance in an industry is, for all intents and purposes, impossible. Monopolies can only be possible in a free market
If a company did get 100%, that doesn't mean that people would be stuck using that. They could use something else. Like, let's say there's a company that sells 100% of the desk lamps in the United States, and no other desk lamp company can get into business because every time they do, they buy them up or something. So maybe what happens, the price of desk lamps is double or triple what it used to be, and people stop using them so much. Or they rig their own, or they get little clip-on lamps, or they start recycling old ones more. So, in other words, the desk lamp company's not just in competition with other desk lamp companies, and once all those are out of business, it's a king of the hill. It's also in competition with the lamp companies, lighting companies, make other kinds of lights, candle companies, clip-on lamp companies, everybody who makes... And if the price of a desk lamp is so high that you can get a stand-up lamp to stand next to it, then you just get a stand-up lamp. You don't even need a desk lamp. You could get 2 stand-up lamps for the price of 1 desk lamp. So you do. So a monopoly is not a threat. If he understands a monopoly is not a threat because of free competition, maybe he should ask, where does this miracle of free competition come from? Why are these companies trying so hard in the free market for customers? Why aren't they running around robbing people or faking something or being fraudulent? Why aren't they being deceptive? And when they are deceptive and when they are fraudulent, why do they pay for that so quickly and so, because the free market punished them? Not always. Not always. Sometimes the people damaged in the free market are damaged to the tune of $50 or $100 each. And it's not even worth their time to sue. But the company, overall, makes millions and millions and millions of dollars. So, since no individual will ever go after them, unless the government does, they're immune to ever being captured or caught. So that's why somebody who's selling something, let's see, Wells Fargo was setting up bank accounts for people, and each individual was only being charged $7.95. And maybe you get 2 bank accounts set up, and eventually you call and ask what's going on, and one of them gets taken off, or both of them, or whatever, and maybe they even refund your money. But they wanted the numbers to show that they're stuck to give to Wall Street and say, yeah, we opened 8,000 bank accounts this month. Yeah, 7,000 last month, 8,000 this month, and next month we hope to open 9,000. A lot of them were fake. Price of the stock went up and up and up. This went on for a couple of years. That costing $10 or $15 to this person and that person here and there never would have been a problem. It ended up costing Wells Fargo, what was it, $170 million in fines or something like that? I mean, way more money than they made on the deal. So the consumers never could have done anything about that. And you think that the consumers would have just left the bank eventually? None of them really knew, you know? If there wasn't some big company watchdog for us to report it to, and the courts, and say, hey, we think there's something funny going on over here, then each individual customer would have just thought that it was one little anomaly. You know, oh, they accidentally opened an extra account for me, they closed it. And then some of them never realized. There are probably people still paying their monthly account fees for accounts that were opened under that scandal, and they've never looked at it because it's only $7 a month and they're not worried. Who knows? So companies are going to do that. The incentives are just too big. And the damage to the individuals involved is too small. Now, eventually the people who bought stocks were mad because these were fake accounts. So then they can go sue, and they can get the government to pursue Wells Fargo for fraud. They can say, I bought these stocks thinking that Wells Fargo is this growing bank with these new accounts coming in, when in fact they're just a static bank who's opening fake accounts and abusing their customers. So they sue for fraud, they get damages, Wells Fargo has to pay them too. Part of the system we live in is not just the checks and balances and the rewards and incentives in the economy. Part of it is the rewards and the incentives given by the government. Part of it is when the government says, okay, you didn't damage any given individual more than $5 or $15 or $100. But we are going to fine you $170 million. How do you like that? So don't go around damaging individuals by $50 or $100. So that's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing behavior. That sort of stuff's not going to happen under your anarchist bullshit. You're not going to have a tort law. We call that tort law because tort means damage, right? Is that what it is? Tort's damage, yeah. And that's damaging somebody, and that's tort law. And you wouldn't have that, would you? You would just have whatever the market would work out. There wouldn't be a market, guys. The market exists in the places where you've made force illegal.
Innovation results in a brand new market, but such monopolies are temporary because competitors will jump in. Even if a company were to consistently be the most competitive company with the best products and the lowest price, it doesn't mean it will be so for all time. In the instant they cease to have the lowest price, let alone try to overcharge for the...
Doesn't matter if you charge the lowest price. Somebody else will just make a better product and charge a few pennies more for a product that's twice as good. So the lowest price isn't the thing. That's not going to protect you. A high price is going to hurt you. That's going to make it valuable for people to get in. So low price argument doesn't work. High price argument doesn't work. You can't maintain monopoly. You can't. And if your price is low, so you're making lots of money, and then somebody opens up a business and has a better product, and they're just charging a little bit more, so everyone's buying their product, you've already got oodles of money, right? You're rich, so you go buy him. What's that guy going to do? He's going to turn around and open another store, and you're going to have to buy that, and he's going to open another, and you're going to have to buy that. Not only him, but other people. Now, why do you buy it? Why don't you just go beat him up and tell him to stop? Oh yeah, because the government's there and they're stopping you from using physical force. That's right.
Product is the moment entrepreneurs will swoop in and underbid them. The only way technological innovation could possibly result in a longer lasting monopoly is with government intervention in the form of patent and copyright law. But there are lots of industries where companies can have a 100% market share, and because it's so expensive to start up, competition can't jump into the market. Even if we assume that it were hard for competitors to enter a market, then that still doesn't allow monopolies to set the price however they want, because consumers still have a choice. If there's such a monopoly on apples, for example, people will buy oranges. If there's a monopoly on fruits, they'll buy vegetables, and so on. No amount of market dominance insulate a company from the laws of supply and demand.
The laws of supply and demand are not relevant in, or they are not as relevant in Nazi Germany, right? Or during World War II, right? Or during in Japan, in Imperial Japan in the 1930s and 40s, right? The laws of supply and demand are wonderful, and they run our whole economy, and we have a very advanced economy because we listen to the laws of supply and demand. But the Russians didn't care about the laws of supply and demand. The Soviets didn't care about the laws of supply and demand. And what happened? Millions of people starved to death. So your laws of supply and demand are not this magical fairy dust that we just can sprinkle on any problem. Okay? They only occur inside of a geographic region where force has been made illegal. How do you make force illegal? Men with guns walk around all the time. They drive their cars. We can call them on the phone. They'll be there in minutes. That's how we make force illegal. Men with guns make it illegal and enforce the fact that it's illegal. But they can't use guns.
A capital-heavy industry with large startup costs, only the state can outlaw competition. One example of such an industry that should result in monopolies, according to the theory, is electrical.
Not only can only the state outlaw competition, but only the state can outlaw the outlawing of competition. Somebody will make some law somewhere that you can't compete in some way and you have to buy everything from them, and only the state can go and wreck them and say you can't do that, right? Like the way that they would do that is, for example, with grain flour milling. And they would have a flour mill, and anybody who built a flour mill, they would just send their boys over and they would wreck it. Now, if they can't do that because that's the use of physical force. Okay? Now the police are going to arrest all those guys and the guy that sent them, and all those guys are going to go to prison. So then we can get on with our lives. Now, in your anarchist society, there's no reason they wouldn't do that, except your boys would go beat them up, and then you're just in a battle. So why not get done with the battling and just have a group of people who have guns and who will respond at the drop of a hat to anybody who starts using physical force?
Yet in 1887, New York City had 6 electrical light companies. Duluth, Minnesota had 5, and in 1907, Chicago had 45. The reason municipalities only have 1 or 2 companies in a given area is because local governments force companies to sign franchise agreements, giving them the exclusive right to offer their services to a given area. The same is true with network news.
Now that probably didn't have to happen that way. They probably did it that way because the government wanted to control the infrastructure. And if we didn't do it that way, then the electrical infrastructure would have been pell-mell, rumble-tumble. And it probably would have evolved, and it probably would have been more organic, and it probably would have been more robust. So the way they did it was the government took control of the infrastructure, and they built it very expensive, very state of technology of the time, and that was in the 50s and 60s. So here we are today with an electrical grid which was designed in the 50s and 60s and built in the 60s and 70s. So we shouldn't have let the government have that control. So there's an example where the government took control of something because it seemed to be a good answer, right? Just dump a bunch of money in and let the government do a good job of building a nice big system. And then 10 years later, that system started looking outdated, and here we are 40 years on, and the system's extremely outdated, and we're going to have to revamp and rebuild and reinvest, and it was a very expensive system, and we shouldn't have allowed the government to build it to begin with. So there's an example of government having some control in the economy where it shouldn't have. Filthy Heretic's mad because these are monopoly situations. But he doesn't understand that the source of the problem is government force being used. He doesn't understand that. He wants to get rid of the government because they use force. I want to get the government out of the economy because they use force. Then we'll be left with a nice, lovely economy. He wants to get the government out of our lives because they use force. And he thinks that he'll be left with a nice, lovely economy. He won't. He'll be left with anarchy.
The reason there's few competitors to CNN, NBC, or Fox on network television is because the government restricts who can broadcast through licensing and fees, thus enabling the very cartels that couldn't exist in a free market.
Yeah, if you want to know why we have the leftist media that we have, thank the government for that.
But why couldn't a cartel form in a free market? It's business's incentive to make as much profit as possible, so if all competitors agreed to raise their prices, they could all profit. The moment a cartel tries to raise prices is the moment competitors would swoop in and underbid all of them. Competitors might even come from companies breaking away from the cartel.
Now, if you haven't seen my video series called Capitalism and Historical Understanding, I think it's called, you should watch that. It's got some hilarious stuff. It's got the Germans who were trying to undersell an American industrialist because the Germans wanted control of the chemical market. And so he was selling bromine at 15 cents, so they started selling it at 8 cents. And so you'd think he's going to be out of business. It actually cost him about 10 cents to produce it. So he's out of business, right? No, he starts buying their bromine at 8 cents. Now it costs them 16 or 18 cents to produce it, so they're losing tremendous amounts of money. He goes around the United States and dumps tons of cash into his situation to buy all this bromine that the Germans are selling at 8 cents. He buys it, he turns around and he puts it back on the market at 15 cents, which is the price he had it at that he thought was reasonable. You're making it at 10, sells it at 15. And they are over there producing it at 16 cents and selling it for 30 in Germany, and they want a piece of the American market, and they can't get it. They cannot sell, they can't make it at 16 and sell it in America at 17 or 18 or 20 or whatever when he's selling it at 15, so they got to get rid of him. So they dump a bunch of bromine on the market, he buys it, and where are they now? Now they've lost a ton of money, and now they have to start over at zero, and he's richer. So they had to sign a contract with him or sign an agreement, and they did come to some agreement with him. His name was DuPont.
Realizing that they can make more money selling 1,000 widgets for $10 than one widget for $1,000. Companies have no incentive to maintain a cartel agreement and are still subject to the same competition and supply and demand curves that restrict monopolies. But what about
supply and demand curves restrict monopolies, but only because those companies aren't allowed to use physical force. And I wish they knew that. Once you take away that restriction, the companies are just going to disappear, and it's just going to be a free-for-all physical force. And they won't be producing this massive amount of wealth. There will be a much smaller amount of wealth, and people will be fighting over a small amount of wealth instead of glorying in a massive amount of wealth.
Repricing. A monopolist can just sell their goods at a loss until the competition goes out of business. Because a large company has more resources, they can afford lower prices. Once the small competitors go out of business, they just jack up the prices again. A company being larger means they have more customers. Thus, when they try to underbid their competitors, you have more customers buying their goods at their loss. Company A, with its 90% market share, will sell 9 widgets for a loss versus the 1 widget their competition loses money on. Price gouging is actually a cost to the wannabe monopolist. Even if this weren't the case, and the monopolist had a virtually bottomless well of resources, like for example government subsidies, then all that's needed is for an entrepreneur to buy the monopolist's goods for a loss and resell them for a profit.
See, he confuses the whole subject there when he says, for example, government subsidies. The government shouldn't be allowed to give subsidies. Now, see, the anarcho-capitalists are very confused on the whole subject. They do not understand that the economy works to the extent that the government stays out of it. And it works to the extent that the government stops the use of physical force from being used inside that market. Right? What does it mean for the government to get into that market and play around, subsidize it, do something with the electric companies? What does that mean for the government to do? It means for the physical force to start being initiated inside that economy. Because the government has physical force at its disposal. Nobody else does. Why doesn't anybody else? Because the government makes sure they don't. The government's a monopoly on it. Now, if we can keep the government out of the private economy, then the private economy does very well. Only as long as the government is protecting everybody's rights and stopping the use of physical force. So they just do not get the idea. The government is a shell over top of the private economy. The private economy is a bubble inside there. When the government starts poking in there and using physical force in there, it damages things and rips things apart and causes problems and causes a lack of wealth and bleeding and issues. So what we need to do is get the government more out of the economy. See, they look around at the United States and all the wealth and all of our corporations and all of this massive, the stock market and all of our efficiency and our economies of scale. They look at all of this and they say, see what's so wonderful when people don't use physical force? Well, how do we get that situation to come about? Now, if you want that situation to get even better, then you need to remove even more physical force. For example, take the government's ability to dictate the electrical grid out, and let's have a free economy as far as the electrical grid goes. Take out the government's control of the post office and the roads, and let the free economy figure that out. And take out the government's ability to tax by force and make that voluntary. Everything will become freer in the sense that it's already free, but we have to have the government there to come in case anybody starts using physical force. We have to have men with guns, dozens of them maybe even, come every time somebody starts using physical force or threatens somebody with physical force. We have to have men with guns show up. That is how we protect this free economy, and we need to get physical force out of the economy. Now, I apologize to my audience that thinks this is very basic stuff, but the anarcho-capitalists are just getting it all so backwards. They want to have a free economy and no physical force being used. How are we going to do that? Get rid of monopolies.
Here's a story you might have heard. The Dow Chemical Company doing just that when a German chemical cartel supported by the
state story I was telling you.
Trying to underbid and price gouge them.
So we'll go forward a bit.
Would be kicking down your door. The one that goes out of business. None of this is even taking into account the power of reputation. Customers might buy a company's product out of brand loyalty because they know that brand can be counted on even if someone else is selling a better product for...
Alright, now there was a company that had a really good reputation the whole world over. Krupp. K-R-U-P-P. They manufactured trucks and heavy chassis and engines, and they also manufactured gun carriages and things for the army and stuff. But they were known all over the world. Now, how well did they do? This was in the 1920s and 30s. How well did they do during the 39 to 45 period? Right? They were taken over by the government. How well did they do in the 45 to 1990 period? They were located in Czechoslovakia. So during that period, they were under the Soviet Union. They didn't exist. They stopped existing. There's no such thing as a brand. A brand is protected by government law. Okay? There's no such thing as one company vying with another company. Companies exist under the law. Okay? That's a legal thing. Corporations are a legal definition. Okay? You would have no brands if you didn't have the government. You would have no companies if you didn't have the government. You would have Soviet Russia versus Nazi Germany. And your little company, your little brand, would just disappear. Okay? It only exists because of the government. Every brand in the United States of America exists by virtue of and by grace of the existence of the United States government.
Cheaper. If this company then suddenly raises their prices after they've successfully price gouged their competition out of business, then this trust is broken, and they're unlikely to buy from them in the future, even if they lower the...
See, there'd be no question of corporations gaining trust or losing trust if the corporations didn't exist. And in Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany, they don't exist, and in Somalia and in Syria today, they don't exist, and corporations only exist in the United States because physical force is against the law, so they have to figure out some other way to get rich besides physical force. Now, if you don't have physical force against the law, then you're stuck. Then you're going to be in a state of anarchy.
Prices again. Enterprising monopolists could try to underbid their competition, but this is not a winning strategy. Here's the thing. The original monopolies only existed because the government granted their friends the exclusive right to do business in an area. But the modern idea flips that on its head. Instead, it's the free market that makes monopolies, and we need the government to stop them. The concern for the power...
Yeah, that inversion happened in the 1890s, and it was the antitrust laws that came about as a result of that inversion.
And potential abuses monopolies could commit are very real. But history is an unbroken chain of government-granted monopolies abusing their power and hurting customers, not the supposed free market monopolies we're supposed to be afraid of. An example of this is the U.S. government's monopoly on money printing that they gave to the Federal Reserve central banking cartel in 1913. Since then, the dollar has lost 98% of its value, and its manipulation of credit has resulted in just about every market collapse in the 20th and 20th.
Alright, there's not too much more in the video. We've done most of what we need to do. Basically, what I'm saying is that we're going to have the government around to protect us from the use of physical force, or else all these daydreams about monopolies and efficiency and customer service and all this is all just daydreams. How much of this analysis works in Russia today? Today, not even under the Soviets, but even today, this analysis is just garbage. It doesn't work in Russia because the government does not protect people's rights. If anybody makes $1 billion, they just put them in jail and call it tax fraud and steal their money. So it's a kleptocracy. So unless you have a government like the United States of America that protects people's rights, you can never make up all this nonsense about a free economy and stuff. What is a free economy? A free economy means free from force. How do you get to be free from force? You have men with guns running around who will come at the drop of a hat anytime anybody starts using physical force. So, the monopoly problem. No, it's the anarchy problem. Monopolies are a problem because government physical force is a problem. So here's an instance where he agrees with us, he understands monopolies come from government force, but he doesn't understand what freedom comes from. It comes from the government protecting us from the use of physical force. So, there we are. Another video from the Filthy Heretic, corrected or knocked down or destroyed or something. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy what I do, please patronize me. This is an easy work. It's fun, though, but I need to be able to make money at it. And in order to do that, I can't get Google or YouTube money anymore. They have taken me off. I can't sell my videos. I can't get ad revenue. So if Charles too is getting $1,500 a month for whatever he's doing, I figure I ought to be able to get some money for possibly more activity, which seems like it shouldn't be too hard to accomplish. Not looking to pick a fight here. Love Charles too. Great objectivist. I'm just saying I would like to do objectivist stuff. And if you want me to do objectivist stuff, we're going to have to come to some sort of an agreement, because I can't do it for free. Or if I do it for free, it'll just be one video a week or something like that. So if you want me to be super active and destroy these people's hippie noodles, go give me $5 or $10 a month on Patreon and quit drinking so much coffee or whatever it is you're spending all your damn money.